All right, so the first thing we're going to look at, adding and subtracting. Scientific notation. All right, so there's a couple things to remember here. All right, I'll put us an example down. We'll go through the examples. We'll jot down little notes, things that kind of help us remember. All right, so let's say that we have 2.37 times 10 to the 8th plus 1.9 times 10 to the 7th. So one of the things to remember with scientific notation is look at our base 10 numbers out here. These numbers have to have the same exponent. Okay, so our first step here, we want to check for common exponent. All right, we're going to check for a common exponent. If they are different, you must change one or the other. Okay, so it doesn't matter which one we change. All right, we just know we have to get these to where they're the same. All right, so would you guys rather make this an 8 or make that a 7? Anybody? Okay, then. We'll make this an 8. Okay, so if we look back at our notes, we can scroll up here and look and see that I moved my decimal to the right. Okay, and when we move it to the right, we're subtracting because our exponent is a negative. When I move it to the left, I'm adding. All right, because our exponent is a positive. Okay, so to make this an 8, I need to move this 1 to the left. Once I move that 1 to the left, I move it 1 space, I add 1 here, and that changes that. So this new number now would be 0.19 times 10 to the 8th. Okay, so we move that. Now I have an 8 and I have an 8, and they match. So now the next thing I want to do we're going to add or subtract, depending on what it's asking us to do, our numbers and keep the scientific notation. Okay, so I'm going to add these. I have 2.37 plus 0.19. Remember to line your decimals up. And we're adding. Okay, it's asking us to add. So 7 and 9 gives me 16. That's 4, 5. Drop your decimal, 2. So I know that this is 2.56. And then my 10 to the 8th, I just bring it down. Times 10 to the 8th power. And that's going to be your final answer. Okay. One thing to remember, the last step, and you won't always have to do that. If the number is greater than or less than, or if it's greater than 10 or less than 1, you must convert to scientific notation. And what I mean by that is if we added these up and this was more than 10, then I would obviously have to move my decimal and it would change my exponent depending on which way I moved it. Okay. And all that goes back to the rules we talked about last week with converting to scientific notation and converting from scientific notation. Okay. So we go through, we check, make sure our exponents are the same. If they're not, like in this case, they weren't, we had to move one. If I made this a 7, I would move my decimal to the right because I would be subtracting it. Okay. And so on. Any questions? We're going to do some more. It ain't like I'm just going to turn you loose. All right, let's look at another one. Okay, turn the page. Let's say we have 2.4 times 10 to the negative 5 minus 7.8 times 10 to the negative 4. And this will be subtraction. So when we go through our steps, all right, we look and see, okay, this is a 5, this is a 4. So I got to change one of these. Okay. Now you're dealing with negatives. So if you're adding or subtracting exponents, you got to keep that in mind because like negative 4 plus 1 is not negative 5. It is negative 3. Negative 4 minus 1 is negative 5. Okay. So to avoid that with negatives, I would always try to make the larger exponent to the smaller one. Okay. Because when you're subtracting negatives, you know, a lot of times some of us get really confused with that. Okay. So if I'm going to add one, okay, excuse me. All right. I'm going to take this to the left here, just like we did in our last example. So that would make this new number 0.24 times 10 to the negative 4 minus 7.8 times 10 to the negative 4. So now I have both of these at 10 to the negative 4. So my final answer is definitely going to have 10 to the negative 4 for sure. Okay. We got that figured out. Now we take these, we're going to have 0.24 minus 7.8. We have a positive number. Minus 7.8 is obviously bigger than 0.24. So my number is it going to be positive or negative? It's going to be a negative because my second number is bigger. If I keep, change, this is 0.24 plus negative 7.8. So we're going to subtract these numbers. 7.8 minus 0.24. Add my placeholder here. Can't take 4 from 0. We've got to borrow. Makes it 6. 7 minus 2 is 5. Drop my decimal. 7.56. And since this number is larger and it's a negative, it will be a negative 7.56. And that would be my final answer because this number is between 1 and 10. Okay. All right, let's look at some multiplication and division. This is, I believe, it's much simpler than what we had been doing. Let's say I have 1.08 times 10 to the negative third times 9.3 times 10 to the negative third. So with multiplication and division, your exponents on your base 10 numbers, it doesn't matter. Okay, it doesn't matter what anything is here. All right, all we're doing here, we're going to multiply our numbers, and then we're going to multiply our base 10s using our exponent rules that we used. Okay, since this is multiplication, what rule will we be using here? What's the answer to a multiplication problem? What's it called? Product. So in this instance with multiplication, you'd be using the product rule, which means we're going to be adding our exponents. Okay, so what this looks like is you're going to have 9.3 times 1.08, and then you're going to have 10 to the negative 3 times 10 to the negative 3. So if we use our little handy dandy calculator, and we'll have 9.3 times 1.08, that's going to give us 10.044 times, and with our product rule, when we do those exponents, we just add them. So this would be 10 to the negative 3 plus negative 3. And what's negative 3 plus negative 3? Negative 6. So it would be 10 to the negative 6. So here's my question. Is this number now in scientific notation? Is this number between 1 and 10? Is it smaller than 10 or greater than 1? You're killing me. No, this number is larger than 10. Okay, 10.044. It is bigger than 10. So what we need to do here, our second step, we need to convert into scientific notation, because scientific notation is between 1 and 10. So how am I going to do that? Where do I need to move this decimal to where this number is between 1 and 10? Where do I move this number, this decimal, so this number is between 1 and 10? How many times? 1. I'm going to move this decimal here. I went left 1 time. Okay? And remember our rule, if your number is greater than 10, if it's greater than 0, or greater than 1, I'm sorry, your number is greater than 1, your exponent needs to be positive. Which means if I move it left 1, this number is greater than 0, which means I'm going to add 1. Okay? So when I add 1, this is now 1.0044 times, what's negative 6 plus 1? This will give you negative 5. And that will be your final answer. So it's very important that once you get your answer here that you pay attention and see is this number between 1 and 10 and make sure that it is. Okay. Moving the decimal for some of you all is probably going to be confusing as far as adding or subtracting. But just remember, if this number is greater than 1, when you move that decimal to, you'll have to move it left because it's greater than 1 or 10. Okay. You move that decimal, you're going to have to add how many spaces you moved. If this number is smaller than 1, you're going to have to subtract because that would mean that your exponent has to be negative. Okay. We'll look at a division one. 7.1 times 10 to the 6th over 8.2 times 10 to the first power. So as division, what rule will we be using here? What's the answer to a division problem? Quotient. This is our quotient rule. We're going to subtract. So what this is going to look like, we're going to have 7.1 divided by 8.2 times, and our quotient rule tells me to subtract 10, because we have common bases here, and we subtract top to bottom, 6 minus 1. Okay. So 7.1 divided by 8.2 is going to give me, and we'll round it here, 0.8659. We'll round that. And then what's 6 minus 1? 5. So it'll be 10 to the 5th. Is my answer now complete? It's not. This number is not between 1 and 10. This number is smaller than 1. So I need to make this number between 1 and 10. Okay. Where do I need to move that decimal so this number is between 1 and 10? To the right. Now, one thing to remember, this number is smaller than 1, which means your exponent would be a negative, so we would subtract up here, and we subtract how many places did we move it. We need to move it between 8 and 6. I moved it 1 space, so we're going to subtract 1. So that way my new number here is 8.659 times 10 to the, what's 5 minus 1? 4. 10 to the 4th. And that would be your final answer. Okay. So if your number is smaller than 1, you're going to subtract how many places you move. If your number is greater than 1 or 10, you're going to add how many places you move. Okay. All right. Now I know I've thrown a lot at you with scientific notation. Okay.